Lynn, this question comes from someone who you will recognize. He is he's a political consultant. And what he says, Lynn, as you know, I'm a Democrat, although I've certainly worked for both Democrats and Republicans. Although what I see now going on in Washington is something which I find to be really very interesting, and I'd like you to comment on it. As you know, one of the things that Barack Obama promised during the presidential campaign is that he would restore bipartisanship to Washington.
What?
Bipartisanship.
Bipartisanship.
Not bisexuality, no, bipartisanship. We already have bisexuality in Washington. We have trisexuality in Washington. And we're working on quadruple sexuality. He says, I'm saying that. I don't want to attribute that to him. He's got enough problems. He says this may be the only promise that Barack Obama will keep. And I raise this specifically in relation to what is currently going on in the arena of financial reform, because what we are seeing is the coming together, in fact, of Democrats and Republicans who in the past have not had all that much in common except their opposition to Wall Street. We see this certainly in the Cantwell-McCain amendment. We also see it in the efforts by Dick Shelby and other Democrats to try to pull together. He notes that Shelby used to be a Democrat, to try to pull together some kind of control mechanism for the derivatives monstrosity. But in fact, we saw agreement between unusual and unlikely layers during the course of the fight around health care. It seems to me that what is going on right now is far more significant than simple bipartisan cooperation, but in fact may represent a whole new direction in constituent politics in the United States, although I'm not sure about that. And I was wondering if you would comment on it.
This is a nice technical question of the type I specialize in. The way that mass behavior is organized was identified by a famous poet, Percy Bysshe Shelley, and especially emphasized in the latter paragraphs of his In Defense of Poetry. And this is what Shelley identified as a principle is the same principle which was brought back into European knowledge in the 1690s by Gottfried Leibniz, the term dynamics. Now, the usual way the term dynamics is used today is used by stupid people who don't know any better. It's used as a synonym for percussive or something. Now, dynamics simply means the same thing as as Leibniz said, the same term as the classical Greek concept of dynamis, the Pythagorean concept. That's what it means. It means that this is a little bit delicate and complicated for understanding in the short term. But, there are two aspects to what we call human thinking, as distinct from animal thinking, and also liberals. But the human thinking operates on one level, as we might call the brain level, an extended, reflexive view of the brain as the center of a nervous system complex, with all the other things that go with nerves in terms of making this function, including enzymes, all these things. But you have in humanity something that is very little known, which is properly called creativity, which has nothing to do with what most people call creativity. Creativity is telling lies for most people. I got caught and had to give an answer, and I lied, and I got by with it. I fooled the judge and got off the case. That's called... but what it means, significant means, is that the human mind, our conception of ourselves as a physical thing, is not entirely real. It's functionally reliable up to a certain point, but it doesn't explain everything. That for example, our sense organs do not show us reality. Our sense organs are like the scientific instruments we develop for experimental monitoring. We look for a certain factor which can be detected, and we use a combination of such factors of detection as a way of trying to understand what is happening out there. In other words, sense perception never shows you the object of the cause. It shows you an effect of the cause, or a set of effects. Now, there are two ways that the human mind tries to cope with this. One is from the brain standpoint. You take what the whole nerve system represents in terms of the brain-centered function. And what you have is a complex, a reflexive, or shall we say, sense perceptions which look at each other. And from this you get a sense of personal identity. In other words, an integration of these experiences into you as your sense of what your identity is, as opposed to something outside you. And when you say I, you often mean that. Now, when you get into a creative mental process, you mean something different. Mind now operates on a higher level. It's a conception of what is not subordinated to the idea of sense perception. This is where creativity, actual human creativity, occurs. And people who are specifically creative, that is, their personality is distinctively a creative personality. All human beings can tend to be creative. But you have also the phenomenon of the creative personality, which looks at the object that the brain sees, or what you see with the brain, and looks down at it. They compare different kinds of world systems together, and you have a sense of what the human mind can be, the creative mind. And this is very poorly developed in society today. It's relatively rare. You have some people you call, sort of freaks who really get on this quicker than others. But generally, people in society today are not conditioned to be creative. They're conditioned to call many things creative, except creativity, which they don't even know exists. But some of us do know what creativity is. And it's on this level that you experience the kind of dynamics that Leibniz referred to in the 1690s and that Shelley referred to in the early part of the 19th century in the defense of poetry. That the mind, the true mind, which does exist, is not located in the sense of a brain function. It's a higher order function, because the brain itself is a sense object. So there is this higher function. Now, you are part of a process, a social process, which is society, or sections of society. And you find that there are certain impulses which are changeable, which take over as moods of a population, or seemingly as a moods. As Shelley defines that in the closing paragraphs of his defense of poetry. This was sometimes called the mass strike phenomenon by Rosa Luxemburg, is this. There is a mood in a population under certain conditions where the population seems to perceive something and be controlled by something that they themselves do not clearly understand. But sometimes the greatest poets, the greatest musicians, for example, the greatest musical composers, the greatest scientist, like a person like Albert Einstein, has this quality of creativity which is not commonplace as an experience to most people because they have not developed that capacity. It's there in them. It's potential for all human beings. But it even expresses itself even to people who can't detect it as a phenomenon. They experience it. And this is what Shelley refers to as mass movements, the mystery of mass movements. What has happened in the United States recently is a change in dynamics. using dynamics in the sense of Shelley's article and the definitions applied by Leibniz. And the classical Greek conception, which is expressed by the famous dialogue of Plato on this thing, the Parmenides dialogue. The Parmenides dialogue is a typification of the stupidity, relative stupidity that most people experience. They cannot make the connections among things. Whereas what Plato is saying, look at all these silly people, like Parmenides. And you could describe one thing after another, they never get the point. And yet they are affected by that which they do not understand. And that's the way society works. What has happened right now, in the past 2 weeks, observed within Germany and observed within the United States, is a change in political dynamics of which I warned some of you back in August of last year, with the phenomenon of dynamics shown by the protests against the administration of Obama by people mass protesting against their own representatives. Dynamics. What has happened in the past 2 weeks has been a shift in dynamics. The controlling shape, the thing that controls the shape of thinking of people, a control which is exerted without their understanding of what has happened to them. Their world outlook, the so-called Weltanschauung, has suddenly changed in character. And thus you have a mass movement for what? For the Glass-Steagall report. The Glass-Steagall principle has suddenly gripped the population in Germany in the past 2 weeks and in the United States in the past 2 weeks. It's an international phenomenon of response and reaction to what? A perception that the whole damn world is doomed to catastrophe unless we do something different. The perception that you have to escape the fire in the forest fire, which is trying to envelop you. And you have a smell, as an animal does, in the air that the forest fire is coming. The animals start running even before they experience the fire. The sense of it. Or the sense of an earthquake when it's begun. And your normal approach doesn't appreciate it. But you have a sense there's something. And you later identify that you felt the oncoming of the earthquake before you had a signal of any perceptual significant degree first. The most important thing about human beings, in the understanding mass behavior of human beings, is this concept of dynamics that works in this way, and it works as the Plato understood and showed by what he had to say about poor old stupid Parmenides, which he demonstrated that way. So it's the inverse of the Parmenides principle. It's the fact that Plato understood it, that he could laugh at Parmenides as a ridiculous character. And what's happened is then a change in the mood of the population has occurred internationally, at least in Europe and the United States simultaneously, within the past 2 weeks. And it's a verification of Plato's opinion about the subject of the Parmenides paradox. That's what's happened. Isn't it wonderful?